Nah, we don't need a professional to fell these trees. Okay. Posted by Independent Okra 8577. This is a story of how my dad, with my consent but against my advice, accidentally weaponized a tree. I live in the capital of a Central European country and recently visited my parents at the countryside. They needed me to help to deal with some trees that they wanted to fell. I assumed they wanted to finally make short work of the semi-healthy trees along the driveway that kept branching in the way. But no, they decided that the row of beeches at the southeastern corner of the property had to go. You should know 3 things here. 1. Those trees are really, really tall, like 15 meters, which is about 50 feet, and rather thin. 2. There's an equally high barn just a few meters behind those trees on the neighbor's property to the south. It's pretty old, but it's been renovated time and time again to serve as a storage and party location. 3. In front of the trees are compost containers, a crooked walnut tree, and bushes that my mother planted, creating a corridor of only around 7 meters, or 23 feet, for the trees to land in without breaking anything. Also important, my sister, also living in a bigger city and not present when these events took place, and I are actually the co-owners of the house and the property as my father transferred ownership to us some years ago. While so far those beaches had survived their fair share of storms, they'd probably become a problem as they kept growing. And since new neighbors on the property bordering on the eastern side are in the process of building a house, they'd be their problem as well. So I agreed they had to go. However, my parents wanted to fell them by themselves, meaning my dad would be the one to operate the chainsaw on them. He worked as a technician before retiring, always did a lot of repair and building work in and around the house, but he's past 70 and has adopted a rather unhealthy lifestyle after leaving the workforce, and his eyesight and motor skills, while still perfectly suited for most kinds of technical operations, have deteriorated a bit. Knowing this, I objected and suggested hiring a professional to do the job and sharing the cost. I argued that any damage, beechwood is pretty heavy, or injury that might occur if these things went sideways wouldn't be covered by insurance and thus come in quite costly. Also, doing this without even as much as notifying the local authorities might be illegal. Okay, it's the countryside. If any regulations of such kind even exist, folks here like to interpret them as friendly advice rather than actual law, but I digress. My parents wouldn't have any of it and even refused to get an estimate from a professional. I did some basic research and found out that the cost would probably come in at around 500 to 1,000 euro, which is $600 to $1,200. Not a small sum, but the forester or lumberjack who'd take up the work would be responsible for any damage. No dice, even after trying to bring my points across several times. "Oh no, we don't need a professional. Why should we waste money when we can do it by ourselves?" they said. "It'll be fine," they said, literally. And while I usually am able to put them off bad ideas by convincing one of them, this time both were hell-bent on going for it. And once that's the case, all hope is basically lost, as especially my mother can be most stubborn as heck. At least I know who I inherited this trait from. As property co-owner, I technically could have just forbidden my parents to fell those trees on their own. But they're my parents, and I love them. They're adults, they live there, and they keep the stuff in order, so I refrained from taking this route. So I told them that they should go ahead if they really want to, but I would not help them with this. My mom asked if I would help them by cutting it up and then carrying the wood once the trees were laying on the ground. This is an important aspect, and I agreed. Also, I begged them to wait for my sister to call them the next day at lunchtime, since I messaged her about the situation and she wanted to back me up. But no. Next morning, I was woken up by my mother calling me to help cutting up the first tree, which my father had brought down successfully. So I dutifully crawled out of bed and did my part in this little deforestation project. Tree 2 and 3 out of 5 also were felled without any incidents. Then came tree 4. My father had apparently not seen a higher up branch that stretched between the branches of tree 5. So once the chainsaw had fully severed the stem, instead of falling sideways as intended, it got caught up, swirled around its axis, and crashed into the walnut tree, which started to bend significantly due to the load. Now, they wanted me to help move the beech by pushing it to roll along the edge of one of the walnut tree's main branches. Besides me knowing that this was not doable, as I said, a 15-meter high tree is a heavy affair, I refused. "But you said you'd help us once a tree is felled," they pleaded. I pointed out that I'd only assist once it was laying on the ground, and leaning into the walnut tree doesn't quite fit that definition. More pleading, but now it was my time to be stubborn, and rightfully so. Since there was no way to, or machinery, to pull that beech away, my father decided to cut parts of its lower stem until handling would be possible. Multiple laws of physics, however, intervened after he had cut the second large chunk, shifting the center of mass of the beech so that it suddenly started to tilt when its branches prevented it from sliding downwards as intended. Then the walnut tree reacted to the lighter load and shift of the balance by springing back, knocking the beech into the neighbor's barn like a battering ram. The dry wooden wall planks didn't stand a chance and splintered away as the felled tree forced its way into the building, creating an impressive hole. My parents now stood there, dumbfounded. My dad slowly scratched his head and tried to realize the situation, while my mother slowly started to panic. Oh no, what do we do now? What if the neighbor calls the police on us? I had watched the spectacle from the balcony and couldn't decide whether to be shocked or to descend into uncontrollable laughter. Closer investigation from outside showed that the tree had crushed a chair, a table, and also caused a cupboard with party equipment to collapse. Though my dad had at least reached his goal and freed the beech from the grasp of the walnut tree. But there was no way of getting it unstuck from the barn without entering. A few hours later, the neighbor, who knew about my parents' plans, returned home, which is where this story might have taken a very bitter and costly turn. But he proved to be a very gracious guy and took the incident, which, in the worst case, could have made the whole barn collapse, in stride. He first was negatively amazed by what had transpired, but after inspection of the barn, he didn't deem it necessary to involve the insurance or the officials and said he would repair the damage by himself if my parents agreed to pay for the materials, the replacement of the destroyed furniture, thanks neighbor, and some beer, probably a lot of beer, for his time, which they gladly accepted. His bill isn't in yet, as he has just begun patching up the hole, but it will easily be upwards of €2,000, roughly $2,400, plus the beer, of course, still making a professional tree removal look like a really good deal. My father offered him to assist with the repairs, and the neighbor thought about it for the fraction of a second and then politely declined. I wonder why. P.S. Tree 5 is still standing. Oh, if it's trees, if it's garage door springs, hire a professional. It's not worth the safety issues and the cost. Hire a pro. Nice job, OP. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments below. Sick, but you still want me in? Okay. Posted by Hello, I is Clay. Someone else's puke story reminded me of this one. Back in the early 2000s, I worked at UPS loading trucks. I'd been there over a year and was well known throughout the building for picking up shifts and being a good worker, and had gained a bit of seniority in the union. Our normal shift was 5 hours, with anything over 25 hours a week being overtime, so I tried to pick up as many extra shifts as I could. Anyone working in a union shop knows that a lot runs on union seniority, and picking up the extra shift at UPS was the same way. Most seniority got first pick, and it went down the line until the shifts were filled. Early on, I made a reputation of working my butt off, so some of the shift soups would delay asking for a fill-in until some of the senior guys left. As could be expected, this upset a couple people when they got passed over, and I got some FaceTime with the union reps on every shift. Ultimately though, this just led to me becoming friends with the reps and doesn't have any bearing on this story until later. So, as I mentioned, I had a reputation through a lot of the soups of busting my butt, working hard, and always being available. That said, my normal shift soup hated me for some reason. I think it was because he was an old retired military vet, and I was a punk 18-year-old with hair down to my shoulders, piercings, and I didn't give a crap about impressing him in any way, except through loading trucks. With us butting heads, I'd brought up a couple of issues with my union rep friends, but nothing was ever serious enough to push the issue. That is, until I got sick. I was in that state where things were coming out of both ends non-stop. I wasn't getting out of bed for anything if I could help it, so I called in. UPS policy at the time was, as long as you let the soup know something like an hour or more before a shift, it wasn't considered a no-call, no-show. I called right at the hour mark, and my soup told me if I didn't come in, I was going to be written up for no call. Malicious compliance time. I rolled up to the warehouse looking like death. I decided to load up on fluids on the way in preparation for loading trucks after a day of non-stop puking and, yeah. We had to go through security and metal detectors before a half-mile walk to the building and then another quarter-mile or so to my load once inside. Those fluids started coming on up just through security, and I also had to stop in the building on the way to my load to avail myself of the commode. At my load, my soup started going over pre-shift crap while I'm standing towards the back next to a trash can. Those that hadn't been near me on the walk-in had already heard about my compliance, so I had a nice ring of free space around me when I started projectile vomiting into the trash can and over the surrounding area. Immediately, my soup shut down the meeting, told everyone to go to work, then asked me what the F I was doing there in that condition. Oh gee, I don't know, Soup. It may have had something to do with you telling me I'd be written up if I come in. I got sent home. Does the story end there? Would I still be typing if it did? The effer decided to still write me up for a no-call, no-show. I WTF'd him when he handed me that write-up, and he said to take it up with the union if I had a problem. Okay, ding ding, round 2. Remember those union rep friends that I'd made from picking up shifts and working my butt off? Yup, I went in search of one and had a chat. He had already heard about my ordeal, a mile worth of warehouse space, and word still traveled faster than it would have if we shared a cubicle, and he knew that I had been in the warehouse puking, and if I was there, how could I have not shown up? And if my soup was the one that sent me home after I showed up, how could the write-up be my fault at all? So he roped in HR. HR was involved in all the official write-ups and hadn't heard the story, but was aware of the write-up. So union rep and I told her the story. She called down and asked the soup to come over to her office, and he came and recounted the same story. When asked if I'd called, he said yes. If asked if I'd still showed, he said yes. When asked if he sent me home, he reiterated that he had. When asked how I could be a no-call, no-show when I'd called, showed, and been sent home, he didn't have an answer. I was dismissed to go back to work, and he was not. Unfortunately, I don't have details on what exactly happened with him. My union rep buddy did say that I wasn't the only one that had been passing along issues for a while, but this was the first they could really do anything about. Being management, Soup wasn't part of the union, and the union rep wouldn't say much else other than it was settled. When a union rep tells you it's settled and they can't say more, my experience has been that they're absolutely right. The Soup kept his distance and didn't speak much to me afterwards outside of what was absolutely necessary. TLDR, I puked and my supervisor got reamed by the Teamsters. Hey, if you're sick, don't go in because you're going to get everybody else sick. Like seriously, that is a workplace 101. Good job, OP. Set the record. Sorry you had to go through that pretty unfortunate time to do it, but great job. I ruined your weekend. That sucks. Posted by Artilleryman08. About 10 years ago, I was a regional manager for a transportation and logistics company. At the time, each regional office worked as sort of an independent company in that we had our own sales and accounting teams, as well as compliance people like safety and a driver trainer. I'll start by admitting that I never fully got into accounting. I took the class in college, but honestly, it was still confusing. I'm not totally lost looking at the reports, but how they get there is Greek to me. I chalk it up to black magic. Our accounting department was the largest office team with a whopping 3 people, the accounts manager and 2 clerks, 1 for accounts receivable and 1 for accounts payable. All the other teams were just 2 people. We also had maintenance and loading dock crews, but they weren't part of the office. Well, in their infinite wisdom, our corporate office decided that they were going to merge some regions as a cost-saving measure. To be fair, it did save money, but it greatly increased our workload. I had all my departments submit a report on what they needed in order to meet the increased load. The loading dock manager actually had a brilliant plan that involved only hiring 1 new worker, promoting 1 to be an assistant manager, and then putting them on rotating 50-hour weeks. It was cheaper than hiring a bunch of guys, and they all agreed to it. The maintenance shop wanted 2 more mechanics, but this isn't about them. The accounts manager asked for 2 additional A&R clerks. I was hesitant at first, but then I saw the amount of paperwork that they had to process now, so I authorized it. The accounts manager used the spreadsheets, along with necromancy, to summon billing documents from the void to send to our customers. It was a pretty efficient system. I had a policy regarding overtime. Department managers had discretion to hand out overtime up to 10 hours a week as long as they could justify it reasonably. However, if a manager required a subordinate to work overtime, the manager would work the same overtime. Our managers were salaried and exempted from overtime, and I didn't want them working their people all the time while they only worked 40 hours. Amazingly, after I implemented this policy, overtime went way down. I mention this because at year end, the accounting team always needed a ton of overtime in order to get all the closing work done on top of their normal duties. It usually involved them working as much as 80 hours a week for the whole month of January, and usually they only finished at last minute. I usually gave them a 4-day weekend at the end. The accounts manager was usually pretty cool, not entitled, and did a good job. But this particular year, when we had even more work to do, she tried to pull a really BS move. In the middle of January, as they were all working a ton to get through year end, she announces that she'll be gone for a weekend to go to a concert with some of her friends. So I asked her if she had a plan in place to make up for the lost work time with no one here working on the weekend. She looked at me confused. "But the clerks will still be here." I say, "Only if you are too. You are familiar with my policy. I'm okay with you all taking the weekend off, but I need to know that all the year-end work will be done in time." "I do have a plan. They are working the weekend to cover for my absence." To be fair, her clerks probably didn't care, and I would have been willing to ease up on the policy in this case because she usually was pretty good about this stuff. However, her tone completely changed that. I'm easygoing, but my subordinates do not dictate to me how things are going to be, and I told her as much. I finished with, "Either you are all working this weekend or none of you are. Let me know by the end of the day." In the end, she couldn't figure out a reasonable way to make up for the lost time, and she was at the office with her team. I was there too because my policy applied to me as well. The only exception I gave myself was the loading dock crew because there was always someone there on overtime. The accounts manager was pretty cold towards me the whole time, and on Sunday, she informs me that I ruined her weekend. I considered pulling her aside to let her know that sorting through driver paperwork for 12 hours a day wasn't my weekend plan either, but instead just nodded and said, "That sucks." A few weeks later, she did apologize for her behavior, and I told her I was sorry she missed her concert, and that unfortunately, that's a part of working life. Sometimes we miss out on things. Funny enough, she said that her friends thought the concert sucked really bad, and even told her that she was lucky she didn't have to go. And yes, the way we did accounting was stupid. I fought my higher-ups over it for 4 years. I also fought to get the higher temps to help year end, but after 2 years, they let me get 3 for the month. It helped a lot. My overtime policies cut annual overtime for the office down so much that I got everyone under me a 15% pay increase. So I stand by it. Comment the secret phrase below before you watch the next video. It's "You rock." I'm Austin. Thanks for watching. See you there.